welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, your boy on social media at MMALOTN, and just as always, the architect behind the MMA Fight Archive, ensuring you leave no stone unturned for these upcoming MMA events. Not only did we just surpass 5,000 fighter profiles available for you to browse through, but we also added ONE FC to now bring our total of 20 different promotions covered on this service, so you have direct access to as many links as possible for these fighters to know exactly what they bring to the table and what it's going to look like when they step foot in the cage on the weekend. We have over 110 subscribers, like I said, 5,000 fighter profiles, 20 different promotions, and there's a 7-day free trial for you to try it out for free. Link for that is in the description below. Once again, that is the MMA Fight Archive. Make sure you guys check it out, and I'm sure it will come in handy for you. All right, this week we're talking about UFC Vegas 105, headlined by a featherweight tilt between Josh Emmett and Lerone Murphy. Fun matchup here. Obviously, Emmett looking to capitalize on that knockout victory he had over Bryce Mitchell, and Lerone Murphy looking to continue his undefeated ways and try to get himself into title contention by defeating a former interim title challenger. So we'll see how that matchup mixes up. Again, this is going down in the Apex. So back to no crowd, no audience after a raucous UFC Mexico and UFC London card over the last 2 weeks. So we'll see how that goes. But obviously, it is an appetizer to the big UFC pay-per-view going down April 12th, headlined by Alexander Volkanovski and Diego Lopez, Michael Chandler and Paddy Pimblett. So a lot to look forward to still. Although there is a break weekend in April, so after that UFC pay-per-view, no UFC for the weekend, although PFL starts up its season, or I guess tournaments. It's a new format this year. I'll talk more about it on that breakdown video, but the first event for the PFL this year goes down next week, or this coming week actually. It's on Thursday, so I'll be dropping a full card breakdown for you guys for PFL as well on Monday, aka tomorrow. So stay tuned for that. I already have written breakdowns for it on the MMALOTN Patreon page, so make sure you check that out. Quick recap of this past weekend's card in terms of Lock of the Night and Dog of the Night plays. Lock of the Night continues to struggle this week, or this year, I should say. Christian Rodriguez ends up coming up short against Melquizael Costa, and I thought he won the first round. Second round, obviously, for Costa. Third round, emphatically in favor of Christian Rodriguez, but it would have been nice to see him rely on his striking a little bit more, as I felt he could have dictated the pace and put that pressure on Costa that would have costed Costa a ton more trouble. So we have to take an L on the Lock of the Night play there for Rodriguez, and again, that really demoralizes me in terms of my confidence in the Lock of the Night plays, but we're going to stay the course. Even though we're 11-13 on the year now for Lock of the Night plays at a 46% hit rate. Yuck. I might have to change my handle after this if I'm not able to get back into the profit, but slow and steady wins the race. We still got, 9 months to go on the year, so I'm not too worried, but still. Not a good start to the year. Dog of the Night, completely different story. We're 15-13 now. Even though we missed on Austin Hubbard this past weekend, we did cash our LFA Dog of the Night, which was an over in the Manuel Sosa fight. But now, like I said, that brings our Dog of the Night record now on the year to 15-13 for a 53% hit rate. I think roughly about a 20% ROI on dogs. So very happy in regards to that. And that's just a, further proof that this is a dog-friendly year. Last couple years have not been so much, but dogs have really been barking this year, and obviously the Dog of the Night play is proof of that. So, very unfortunate for the Lock of the Night, but happy with my Dog of the Night performance. All right, that's pretty much a wrap on the recaps here. We got 13 fights to break down for this UFC Vegas 105 card. I very much enjoyed how I broke it down for you guys last week in terms of being a little more concise with the breakdowns. I know I had some people that liked the quicker breakdowns, and I like some people that liked the more in-depth breakdowns. I'm going to try to stick with the quicker ones this time around, not getting so deep into the backgrounds of each fighter, but more so how they match up against the opponent that they have this weekend. hopefully you guys are enjoying that. So without further ado, let's get right into this bad boy. First matchup up is going to be in the strawweight division as we have the return of Loma Lookboonmee coming in at minus 600, going up against Estela Nunes, who comes in at plus 425. Now, both these women have been out for an extended period of time. Last time Brazil was able to, Lookboonmee was able to get a decision victory over Brazil, whereas Estela Nunes is riding a 4-fight losing streak, although her last loss came by a nasty injury she suffered after a takedown by Victoria Dudikova dislocated the elbow of Nunes. Now, Nunes training out of American Top Team to try to save her UFC career, whereas Loma Lookboonmee, who has long time been a part of the Hickman brothers over there in Thailand at Bang Tao Muay Thai, seemingly has tried to take advantage of the UFC PI for this training camp, as well as training over there at Syndicate MMA. Lookboonmee is a nasty Muay Thai striker who's obviously improving her grappling, just as we saw when she submitted Elise Reed a couple fights back, and even when she was able to out-grapple Denise Gomez. But we know at her best, she can dictate the pace with her striking combinations, specifically with her Muay Thai, landing nasty knees and elbows in close, but also good leg kicks from distance. Estela Nunes also likes that Muay Thai approach, but her issue has often been that she falls short in terms of her cardio. We see her often gassing out, which is why opponents are able to either finish her in deep water or start pulling away in the second and third rounds. She's very fast and quick with her strikes down the pipe when she's in a groove early, but like I said, if she's forced to face somebody that can dictate the pace better than her, she's going to end up falling short, and that's exactly what I'm expecting here with Lookboonmee. Look for Loma to put a pace and style on Nunes that she won't be able to keep up with. It will be competitive early, but if Lookboonmee can drag this into the second and third rounds, I think we'll see Nunes slow down once again, allowing Lookboonmee to get either a second or third round finish. Next up, sticking with the strawweights, but we're going to go over to Vanessa Demopoulos, who comes in at minus 105, going up against Talita Alencar, who comes in at minus 115. Now, interesting line movement on this fight, as when I originally studied it, Alencar was closer to plus 135. Now she finds herself as the slight favorite. Both these women are BJJ black belts, but I think it's obvious that Alencar is the much more decorated BJJ specialist, and once this fight ends up hitting the ground, I think she'll be able to put Demopoulos in bad positions. Demopoulos has gotten some, wayward decisions to go her way, but the fact she has a 5-3 UFC record kind of proves that maybe she deserved to be on this platform, even with some of the sketchy decisions that she got. It's a lot of her athleticism and some of the power that she throws in her strikes that often sway judges in her favor. But as we saw in the Jacqueline Amarim fight, even with the controversy that was there, I feel like she can find herself in trouble against better specialists, especially when fights hit the mat. And I think that's what she's facing here against Alencar, who doesn't give too much confidence in terms of the striking, but if she can get this fight to the ground, which I believe she will, I don't think Demopoulos has that good of takedown defense, and I think that will lead to Alencar eventually getting this fight to the ground, where she'll have a decided grappling advantage, in my opinion, and I wouldn't be surprised if she's actually able to wrap up a submission. The only issue I have with actually backing Alencar with money is, again, she doesn't instill too much confidence in the striking realm. If Demopoulos can survive early and then get this into the second and third rounds, it's going to get harder for Alencar to get those takedowns, and then she'll be at the mercy of the athleticism and speed of Demopoulos in the striking realm. So I am going to go Alencar. I'm going to go Alencar by submission, but with her taking as much action as she is and now being the favorite, I'll likely end up passing on this matchup, but I'm still going to go Alencar to win this fight. All right, next up, bantamweights going at it here as we have Victor Henry coming in at minus 205, going up against Pedro Falcao, who comes in at plus 175. Now, Victor Henry is coming off of a submission loss to Charles Jourdain, which was the first ever fight that he had been finished in. Absolutely crazy that he had never been finished up until that fight. But Jourdain is a fighter that often deals with guys looking to take him to the ground, hence why he has perfected that guillotine and ended up submitting numerous opponents with it, most notably Victor Henry. But Henry normally puts on a very solid pace and pressure that not a lot of opponents are able to keep up with. That's how he was able to defeat Raoni Barcelos, throwing a lot of combinations, utilizing a lot of footwork and movement, and even mixing in some takedowns when he can. Henry is a very complete fighter who I just wish got into the UFC a little bit earlier. He's going up against Pedro Falcao, who finally gets a full training camp to try to get his first victory inside the UFC. Last time around, coming up short against Victor Hugo in a fight where he could not establish his BJJ black belt, ultimately getting chipped away at and beaten to the punch by Victor Hugo. Falcao is not that bad of a fighter, trains out of, I believe, the Ruka gym, has some decent striking, but it's obvious he wants to get fights to the ground to have success. Here against Henry, I think he's going to struggle to deal with the wrestling of Henry, and even if that's defensively speaking, I think we'll see Henry do a good job in terms of stopping the takedowns and then applying pressure and output that Falcao won't be able to keep up with. I think that submission loss to Jourdain is a blip more than anything. I think Falcao might try to take advantage of that guillotine loss of Henry from last time around, but I don't think it's going to come to fruition. I don't think he has nearly as good control nor a submission or as much of a submission threat. And I think that will keep him on the defensive for this fight for the most part, and that will lead to Henry chipping away at him and winning this fight on the scorecards. Also of note, when I study this, minus 175 on Henry, now up to minus 205. So it seems like the public is starting to come in on him as well. All right, welterweights up next here as we have McKee coming in at plus 140, going up against Daniel Frunza, who comes in at minus 160. Now, it hasn't been the best of times for McKee in the UFC, who is now 0-4 over his 2 stints in the promotion, and this will likely be a pink slip fight if he's unable to pick up the victory. Normally, he utilizes a solid output and volume-based approach with the striking, utilizing his length and reach to touch opponents up from distance, and then start turning up the volume in deeper water. He is a former Cage Warriors champion and had a very solid run in between his UFC stints with Cage Warriors once again, where he won the title and defended it. Daniel Frunza earned his UFC contract through the Contender Series this past season by pulling off an upset against a 17-1 fighter who he ended up finishing in the second round. Now, Frunza is a power puncher who likes to walk down his opponents, and although his volume lacks at times, it's the power in which he lands that often nullifies any type of volume that his opponents often land on him. But there are a lot of fights where he's often behind on the scorecards or behind in general, but ends up landing the big shot to pull victory out of the jaws of defeat. He trains alongside Damon Blackshear down at the KO zone. It seems he's been mixing it up at Killcliff FC as well. But in this matchup against McKee, I think it's going to be one of those where we see the volume of McKee and hopefully his responsible defensive striking, not exchanging too much in the pocket here against Frunza, and I think that will be his volume that allows him to outpoint Frunza and win this fight on the scorecards. Again, Frunza has that power to change the tide of this fight, but I think the better minute winner here is going to be McKee, and you'll take full advantage of that 5-inch reach advantage he'll have, and I think he'll pick apart Frunza from distance and win this fight on the scorecards. Next up, flyweights going at it here as we have Diana Belbita coming in at plus 385, going up against Diony Barbosa, who comes in at minus 500. A clear striker versus grappler battle here. Obviously, Belbita, 2-fight losing streak, got submitted by Molly McCann last time around, and now she's going up against a solid BJJ black belt in Diony Barbosa, who thrives once fights hit the mat. Her last loss came against Miranda Maverick, who was able to utilize her grappling defensively, but also out-grapple Diony Barbosa and beat her from that top position while staying away from submissions. I don't think Belbita has that good of a takedown defense game, and I think that will eventually lead to Barbosa dragging this fight to the ground. I think that without a doubt, Barbosa should be able to get the submission win within 2 rounds here. And I saw the over-under, the under 2.5 sitting around plus 190, which makes me believe we'll get a decent line on Barbosa to win this fight by submission. Props are not out as of the time of this recording, but I'll definitely be highlighting that prop, especially on the prop drop later on this week. But I'm going to go Barbosa here, and I think she wins this fight with relative ease once she lands that takedown. Next up, Davy Grant coming in at plus 140 in this bantamweight fight, going up against Daniel Santos, who comes in at minus 160. Now, the 39-year-old Davy Grant is still a guy that can go out there and perform at a high level, just as he showed when he swept Ramon Tavares on the scorecards back in, I believe, November or December. I could be off on that in terms of when that fight was. But regardless, it was a very solid performance from him, showcasing that he still thrives on fights that he can drag into the pocket and unload with his big strikes. Considering the amount of fights that he has that takes place in the pocket, the fact that he has never been knocked out is absolutely crazy, but goes to show that he still has a lot to offer even at this stage of his career. He goes up against a very tough Daniel Santos, who we have not seen in action for nearly 2 years. He was scheduled twice in that time frame, but was forced to pull out of both matchups. Normally, we see very aggressive striking style from him, looking to walk opponents down and land unorthodox and flashy strikes. And he has a decent grappling game if he needs it as well. But just as we saw against Julio Arce, when he's fighting somebody that has a good enough striking game, he'll find himself having some issues. Now, it seems like the public is pervy on Grant here as well, considering when I studied this, he was at plus 180. Now he's down to plus 140, and I have to agree with them. I think this is a fight where Grant can utilize his power and his stalking approach to really force Santos into a war. And considering Grant's durability and chin as of late, I will choose his durability over Santos's, and I think that will see Grant actually land the bigger, more effective strikes, and his output will ultimately allow him to get ahead here on Santos until he lands that knockout shot. So give me the Brit here to pull off the upset and get on a 2-fight winning streak. All right, flyweights up next, as we have Osbourne coming in at plus 180, going up against Luis Gurule, who comes in at minus 210. Now, Osbourne is looking to avoid a 4-fight losing streak, which will ultimately end his UFC career, if I'm not mistaken. He has a very salty 12-8 record, and I think we've been seeing the ceiling of his performances, right? The win against Charles Johnson is one that's all on Charles. You know, I think that was a fight that Charles could have easily won had he had the type of confidence he had during that recent winning streak he was on. But then obviously we saw Almabayev dominate Osbourne and submit him. Jafel Filho dominate him, submit him. Ronaldo Rodriguez nearly finished Ronaldo, and as we saw this past weekend, Ronaldo has horrible striking defense, but just as we know from Osbourne, if he's unable to get that early finish, things will start to go sour for him late, especially if he's going up against a fighter that is willing to dictate the pace. Charles Johnson was not willing to do so in the second or third rounds of their fight, but unfortunately for him, he's going to have to deal with the guy in Luis Gurule who will do exactly that. Gurule earned his contract through the through the Contender Series this past season by defeating previously undefeated Nick Piccinini, and that was a very close fight, a fight that he took on short notice, and a fight in which he had accepted on short notice just after he had picked up a previous win over veteran Jacob Silva. Gurule is a guy that loves to push the pressure, push the pace, stay in his opponent's grill, not giving them any room to breathe, throwing combinations, but being very educated and disciplined about it. That's why we often don't see him losing rounds or even in a position where he's losing minutes in a fight. The Piccinini fight, we have to give him a little bit of grace considering the type of wrestling he was facing that night, but also the short notice aspect of it for Gurule. But I think this is a matchup where Gurule can dictate it from jump, and as long as his durability continues to hold strong, I think Buday will struggle to deal with that pace and pressure that Gurule is going to put on him, which will lead to Gurule either finishing him in the second or third round of this matchup. I love Gurule in this spot, and I would be stunned if Osbourne is the first person to hand him a defeat. All right. Next up in the middleweight division, we got Torres Finney coming in at minus 235, going up against Robert Valentin, who comes in at plus 200. Now, Finney earned his contract through the Contender Series this past season with his third opportunity after he just absolutely starched Abdullah Urami. And something I just quickly want to touch on in regards to the Contender Series and Dana's willingness to give of fighters who just go out there and get quick finishes contracts, and even guys that lose like Jose Medina contracts. But then when you have guys like Finney and guys like Benjamin Bennett who have competitive matchups against fighters that are good, he overlooks them and be like, hey, that performance wasn't that great. Maybe it's because he's fighting other guys that have solid skill set and won't just roll over like some of these can-crushing matchups that you get. The reason Torres Finney was unable to have as dominant of a performance against guys like Yuri Panfarov and Carl Rosten, I believe the guy's name was, is because they are a lot tougher than Abdullah Urami. You know, Urami was a guy who was coming off an extended layoff, if I'm not mistaken. Horrible takedown defense. We saw him get taken down immediately. Nothing off of his back. Couldn't provide any resistance. That's why Torres Finney looked as good as he did. And Dana's like, oh, if you fight like that the last 2 times, you would have got it. He was fighting like that the last 2 times, but he was just facing way more resistance than he was against a guy like Arami. So that's kind of my issue with Contender Series at times, is that some of the best fighters may not be able to have their best performances because they're facing very tough competition. So just food for thought there. But Taurus Finney, we know what he brings to the table. Strong bulldozer of a man, standing 5'8" at 185 pounds. He'll always be at a height disadvantage, but his sheer strength and ability to take opponents down and smother them from that top position to eventually work for to a dominant and finishing position will always keep him live and difficult to deal with. But when he faces guys that are a little bit technically more sound or might have an answer to his grappling game, that's where things will start to get shaky for him, because as he starts to slow down, he gets easier to hit, easier to put away, and that's where guys will be able to take advantage of him. Up until this point, he's 10-0, flawless, undefeated, but he will obviously face much more resistance in the UFC than he did on his come up. With Robert Valentin, he made it to the finale of this last season of The Ultimate Fighter, ended up coming up short in the finals against Ryan Loder, but luckily the UFC still enjoyed what they saw from him on the show and brought him into the UFC, and this guy's a very violent and fun fighter. Decent striking, obviously very interesting grappling game as well. He has some slick jiu-jitsu up his hands, or up his sleeves, I should say, but he's very violent, and that's where I think he'll start to set himself apart and hold on to a roster spot longer than most people are expecting him to. Finney should win this fight, but I feel like Valentin could provide enough resistance and his violence, which could cause Finney some issues and cause him to, get frustrated and make some mistakes, and something that Valentin might be able to take advantage of. I don't know if Valentin will be able to choke out to Finney because he has no neck to begin with, but I think the constant resistance from Valentin could cause Finney some issues that could lead to Valentin either finding a finish later on in this fight, or winning it based on damage, as Finney is more so just looking to control here. I think I'll end up getting to the window on Valentin, especially at plus 200 here. The line is wide. In my opinion, my confidence is low. But again, considering the wide line here, I still feel like even taking a half unit shot here on Valentin might be the way to go because of his damage-based approach and Finney just wanting to, out-wrestle guys. If he's unable to finish Valentin, things will get sticky for him later on in this matchup. But yeah, I'm going to go Valentin to get the finish in round 3. All right, next up, Brad Tavares coming in at minus 235 in this middleweight clash against Gerald Meerschaert, who comes in at plus 200. And I've been giving Tavares the benefit of the doubt as of late. He is 1-4 over his last 5 fights. His only win coming against the ghost of Chris Weidman. But he is a guy whose durability is starting to go out the window. His fight IQ starting to take a little bit of hits as well. And guys are able to just put him in bad positions and keep him there now. And he's going up against a guy in Gerald Meerschaert who's going to be doing his damnedest to put Tavares in those bad positions and try to find the finish, just as he often does. Tavares will obviously have a striking advantage, but I don't think it's to the point that's going to cause Gerald Meerschaert a whole lot of problems. I think we'll see Meerschaert be able to get a hold of Tavares here and put him in some bad positions on the mat, which will eventually lead to him getting that finish. I think it'll take a little bit of wear and tear, as Gerald Meerschaert normally needs to get hit a couple times to start waking up. But I think we'll see Meerschaert eventually get Tavares to the ground, smother him, and eventually work to a finishing position, whether it's a rear naked choke or just a straight up guillotine. I think he'll get that submission in the second or third round, just as a classic Gerald Meerschaert performance. So at plus 200, count me in on Meerschaert, who is taking a little bit of action. Again, I studied, and this fight was at plus 230 for Meerschaert, now at plus 200. All right, heavyweights going at it here as we have Kennedy Nzechukwu coming in at minus 300, going up against Martin Buday, who comes in at plus 250. Now, Nzechukwu is now on a 2-fight winning streak, finishing both Chris Barnett, which was an injured Chris Barnett, and then last time around against Lucas Dresky. He is starting to come into his own. He's been in the UFC for several years now. The greenness is starting to wear off. He's starting to become a little bit more confident in his hands, throwing with a little bit more bad intentions. But I still can't get that loss to Ovince St. Preux out of my head. The lackadaisical approach from him there, and even the veteran experience of OSP coming into that fight was very surprising to see Nzechukwu come up short in that spot, especially as such a big favorite. Now, he's going up against a guy, Martin Buday, who I've been high on, but seeing some of the performances from him as of late and the lack of urgency in some of his fights is really shattering the potential that I thought that this guy had. The performance he had against Chris Barnett in his UFC debut, the performance he had I believe on the Contender series as well against Lorenzo Hood, that just high pace, high pressure, grinding clinch game, wearing opponents down, dirty boxing, knees in the clinch. We're not seeing that as much in his recent fights, right? He got walked down and finished by Shamil Gadziev. His fight against Andrei Arlovsky, probably the most boring fight we've seen in years, but he was allowing Andrei Arlovsky too much rope in that fight, not asserting himself enough, not throwing with enough power. Buday can be successful in the heavyweight division. He just needs to showcase that urgency. And if he can do it here against Nzechukwu, this is a very winnable fight. I wouldn't be surprised if Buday is very strong in that clinch position, pushing Kennedy up against the cage and causing some issues there. Obviously, at range, Nzechukwu will have the advantage being able to utilize his speed and athleticism advantage to pick apart Buday from distance, and that's ultimately where I'm going to lean with my prediction. I think we see Nzechukwu touch him up, stick and move, land some power, mixed up in the clinch a little bit, but I wouldn't be surprised if Buday, turns it on. It's just hard to build that confidence considering those flat performances we've been seeing as of late. There's no way this line should be this wide. Again, it's most likely recency bias here. And again, obviously the poor form of Buday before. But take a macro view of this and not a micro view of it. Because if Buday can come out and fight as we've seen in the past, this is a difficult fight for Kennedy. So this might be one of those spots where my prediction is going to be Kennedy and Kennedy by decision, but I might have to take a little bit of a poke on Buday at plus 250. He has the tools that could cause a guy like Kennedy some issues. So I wouldn't be, going out there and parlaying Kennedy and Nzechukwu willy-nilly, but in terms of a prediction, I'm going to go with him here, just as his form has looked a little bit better recently than we've seen from Buday. So give me Nzechukwu and Nzechukwu by decision. All right, bantamweights at it here as we have Cortavias Romious coming in at plus 145, going up against Chang Ho Lee, who comes in at minus 170. Now, Romious had a pretty bad UFC debut against Gaston Bolanos in a fight where he couldn't get anything off. And that was a fight where he did have moments of success, especially with his grappling and his control, but he would start off the round well, and then Bolanos would be able to reverse the position and start landing big damage from on top, or eventually get fights back into the grappling realm, in the striking realm where he had a clear advantage and he was able to pick apart Romious. It was a very poor performance from the BJJ brown belt, I believe, here in Romious, or purple belt, I should say. Normally, he likes to get fights to the ground. On the feet, very basic, nothing special there. Has some decent power, but the majority of his success normally comes on the ground where he showcases his BJJ approach. Now, Chang Ho Lee earned his contract to the UFC through the road to UFC last time around by picking up a very close and grueling matchup against Long Xiao, largely taking place in the clinch, the grappling, reversals galore, but the fact that Lee did not give up position for too long in either of those or any of those rounds, I like his urgency. I like his willingness to or unwillingness to settle for bad positions. Striking still needs a little bit of work, but I think it's really his grappling that often sets him apart in most of his fights. Now here against Romious, I have to lean with the constant work rate of Lee. I think that Romious could get some positions here, but I think we'll see Lee reverse out of them. I think we'll see him break out of those spots, create scrambles, get winning positions of his own, and I think that he'll end up having better winning moments, landing damage, getting control time, and outdoing anything that Romious is throwing back his way. I think Lee has also had a slightly tougher strength of schedule. And yeah, I'm going to go with him to win this fight on the scorecards. And I think that minus 170-ish line, it's accurate. I think that's roughly where this fight should be lined. All right, next up, co-main event, featherweights to close out the cards here, or the card here. Next up, we got Pat Sabatini coming in at plus 180, going up against Joe Anderson Brito, who comes in at minus 210. -10. Now, Sabatini looking to get his first UFC winning streak going as last time around, or I should say his a new winning streak going here. As last time around, he was quickly able to submit Jonathan Pierce in the first round of their matchup. Now, we know what Sabatini is all about. Strong wrestler, crushing BJJ pressure, and he often does a great job in terms of working to a dominant position to sink in chokes and sink in submissions and force the tap. On the feet, leaves a little bit to be desired in terms of his effectiveness with his striking. It's clear that he wants to get his wrestling going and try to drag opponents to the ground. He's going up against Joanderson Brito, who I'm still surprised lost his last matchup to William Gomez, but that was a fight where I felt he was comfortable defending for too long, and then when he finally got out into space and to get to his game, it was too little too late for him to land enough effective damage for judges to end up scoring that fight in his favor. That snapped a winning streak for Brito. I believe that was a 4 or 5 fight winning streak he had going in to that Gomez fight, but he is normally a guy that fights with a lot of aggression, moves forward, and throws big power at his opponents. He often drags out bad takedown attempts from his opponents where he's able to capitalize with submissions. And I think this is a fight where he can defend long enough to eventually open up that knockout opportunity for him. What's funny about Sabatini's career is that the majority of his losses have come by first round finish. He lost in 90 seconds to Diego Lopez. His last 3 losses have all come in less than 90 seconds. And I think Brito, with the power and aggression that he brings, if Sabatini is unable to establish dominant position, I think Brito can kind of just let go on him and have target practice pretty much until he comes up with a finish here. So I'm going to go Brito by knockout, -210. Again, the only thing that gives me issue here is Brito's willingness to just defend longer than he should. That'll give Sabatini enough time to chain wrestle different attempts, eventually get the takedown and get some dominant positions. But once Brito gets back to his feet or reverses position, it's hell and high water for Pat Sabatini. So I'm going to go Brito. I think he comes through with the knockout. -210 got me a little bit queasy, if I'm being honest. And that brings us to our main event in the featherweight division, as we got Josh Emmett coming in at +270, going up against Lerone Murphy, who comes in at -330. Now, a lot of action coming in on Lerone Murphy, as when I studied this a few days ago, he was down at -260. So a lot of people piling onto Murphy, probably parlaying him up as well. And I kind of agree. Now, quickly talking about Josh Emmett, he's coming off that knockout victory over Bryce Mitchell back, I believe, in December of 2023. So it's been a while since we've seen Emmett in action. We know, obviously, the big power punching that he brings to the table. Better technical strikers can obviously piece him up and get the better of him, as we saw with Ilia Topuria. He is susceptible to submissions like we saw against Yair Rodriguez. But when he's in his groove, he normally does a good job in terms of landing big power, either coming through with knockouts or landing multiple knockdowns and winning fights on the scorecards as well. But he is 40 years old, starting to slow down a little bit. 40 is not the best age for somebody at featherweight, especially competing at a top 5, top 10 level. Things might start to go haywire for Emmett. On the flip side for Murphy, he still has an undefeated 15-0-1 record as a 33-year-old. Last time around, having a very veteran-like performance against Dan Ige. That was a tough fight in the first round, but then he started to pull away in the next 2 rounds, showcasing good fight IQ. Like I said, there were moments where he was in bad positions, but he was quickly able to scramble and get to better spots and eventually get the better of Dan Ige. Prior to that, he put on a great performance against Edson Barbosa in his first main event slot, showcasing that he can go 25 minutes if he needs to. He has an explosive striking game, but also very good in terms of getting fights into the grappling realm and finding positions where he can grind opponents out. It's getting harder for him to come across finishes, as his last 4 wins have come by decision, and I'm expecting that trend to hold up once again here against Emmett. I think that we'll see we'll see this fight be a little competitive, but I think for the most part, Murphy will start running away with this fight and getting some grappling control, where I think he'll be able to keep Emmett in bad positions. Emmett is always one punch away from making things more interesting, but I think Murphy has a good enough striking game and good enough just overall awareness, right? He'll have a 3-inch height advantage, a 3-inch reach advantage. And he does a good enough job in terms of mixing the martial arts and knowing how to stay away from the danger that his opponents normally present. So I'm going to go with Murphy here. I think he wins this fight on the scorecards. I'm going to be looking at the over 4.5, and I'll be looking at the Murphy by decision prop. And I might. Just seeing how I feel later on this week, I might end up parlaying Murphy. I'm sure we're going to get some action on Emmett to bring that line down. Sharps are going to be looking to take advantage of that wide line on Emmett, but I think that Murphy is more than up to the occasion here, and I think he comes through on the scorecards. All right, there you guys go. Full card breakdown for UFC Vegas 105. Reminder, I'll be back tomorrow for the top 3 lock of the night candidates, as well as the PFL full card breakdown. So PFL season starting right up. PFL tournament started right up. I got you guys covered. Cannot wait for that to kick off. All right, I'll see you guys again tomorrow. Peace.
Last thing.